The winter storm arrived earlier than anyone expected. It came rolling across the Montana plains like a slow-moving wall of white, changing the quiet morning into a world of swirling snow and soft gray light. The forecast had mentioned light flurries, something gentle that would make the scenery look pretty for the wedding. But what arrived was different. Stronger, thicker, the kind of storm that made the wind sound like it was brushing its fingers against the cabin walls. Eli stepped outside the main lodge, pulling his jacket tighter as he looked across the empty stretch of land where guests were supposed to start arriving in just a couple of hours. Snow was already piling on the steps. He tried not to worry, tried to keep his breathing steady. Today was supposed to be smooth and beautiful. Today was supposed to be simple, his wedding day. But nothing about this storm felt simple. Inside the cabin, the light flickered again, dimming and brightening as the generator struggled. The building was warm, but every small flicker made Eli's stomach twist with frustration. The last thing he wanted was for his bride, Mia, to walk into a cold cabin with lights that kept going out. Mia loved details. She noticed everything. She had spent months planning this day, making sure every decoration and every moment would be meaningful. Eli pushed the door open again, snow falling from his cowboy hat as he stepped inside. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Still early morning. Still time to fix things, hopefully. He was kneeling beside the generator room door, trying to figure out why the backup lights were failing, when he heard the crunch of tires on the snowy driveway. His head lifted in surprise. No guest should have been arriving this early. When he stepped outside again, he saw a familiar old truck, the kind with chipped paint and too many miles but a loyal engine. The door opened, and Rachel climbed out, brushing hair away from her face as the wind rushed past her. It took Eli a moment to react. He hadn't seen Rachel in almost 3 years. Not since they both moved away from their childhood ranching towns. But she looked almost the same warm smile, steady eyes, and that quiet confidence she always carried, as if storms and broken generators were just small things life handed you for practice. "Rachel?" Eli blinked. "What are you doing here already? I thought you were driving up with the others." Rachel laughed softly and slammed her truck door. "Storm slowed everyone else. But I left before it got bad. So, here I am. Figured you might need help with setup." Eli let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "You always had good timing." "I try," she said with a shrug. Then she looked around at the snow-covered porch, the flickering cabin windows, and the worry written on Eli's face. "Something's wrong?" "Generator keeps acting up. Just want everything ready before Mia gets here." Rachel nodded gently. "Then, let's take a look." They walked inside together, snow melting from their boots and leaving tracks on the wooden floor. The cabin smelled like pine wood and warm spices from the small pot of cider Mia's cousin had prepared earlier. The decorations, simple white ribbons, dried flowers, little lanterns, were arranged in neat circles around the seating area. Everything looked peaceful, but the lights kept flickering at the edges, reminding them that peace didn't always mean perfect. Rachel bent beside the generator control panel, brushing dust off a corner and testing a switch. She didn't know everything about machines, but growing up on a ranch had given her the basics. Eli watched her work, grateful for another pair of hands, especially hers. Rachel had a way of making problems feel smaller, like any issue could be solved if you just gave it an honest try. "You nervous?" she asked without looking up. "About the wedding?" Eli rubbed the back of his neck. "A little. A little?" Rachel gave him a sideways glance, half teasing. Eli smiled weakly. "Okay. Maybe more than a little. There's just a lot on my mind." Rachel didn't push for details. She simply nodded and tightened one of the loose wires. That was something he always liked about her. She listened without forcing anything out of you. The generator clicked again, and the lights steadied for a moment. Rachel wiped her hands on her jeans and stood. "That might help for now, but you may need to restart it if the storm gets worse." "Great," Eli muttered. "Just what I needed." Rachel nudged his shoulder. Hey, it's going to be fine. And at least you're not doing this alone anymore. He nodded, feeling a bit lighter. The storm outside might have been growing, but having Rachel here made the cabin feel steadier, warmer. They moved through the rest of the cabin together, checking windows, adjusting decorations, and preparing the small space for the ceremony. Rachel held a lantern while Eli tried to fix a loose ribbon that kept falling from a beam. At one point, Rachel laughed because Eli's fingers were too cold and clumsy, and he ended up tying the ribbon into the wrong loop. Her laughter wasn't loud, it was that quiet, gentle sound he remembered from childhood. The one that made everything feel easier. Eli chuckled too. I'm not built for small crafts, okay? I'm built for heavy lifting. That's why I'm here, she said, to handle the delicate stuff. They worked like that for another hour, moving from task to task in comfortable silence. Eli found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't expected. The wind still pressed against the windows, and the roads were still blocked, meaning the guests, even Mia, would be delayed. But he wasn't as anxious now. Rachel had a way of absorbing tension around her, smoothing the rough edges of whatever moment she stepped into. At one point, Eli stood near the doorway, watching the snow swirl outside like a slow dance. He wondered if the storm was some kind of message or just bad luck. He wondered whether Mia was stuck somewhere on the road, frustrated or worried. You're thinking too much, Rachel said from behind him. He turned slightly. Maybe. No, maybe about it. You always think too much when you're nervous. He smiled again. How do you always know? She shrugged lightly. Some things don't change, even when people do. They both fell quiet, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the distant whisper of the wind. It wasn't uncomfortable, silence, just thoughtful. Rachel walked closer, leaning beside him as they looked outside together. I'm sure Mia's okay, she said gently. She's probably waiting for the snowplows like everyone else. I know, Eli replied. I just wanted today to be perfect for her. It still can be, Rachel said with confidence. Sometimes storms make the best stories later. He glanced at her, appreciating the optimism. They spent another hour lighting candles and securing chairs so they wouldn't wobble. Rachel checked the kitchen, making sure the drinks were still warm and the simple snacks were safe from the cold gusts every time the door opened. Finally, they sat for a moment at the long wooden table, catching their breath. Eli rubbed his hands together, trying to warm his fingers. Rachel slid a cup of warm cider toward him. Drink, she said simply. Eli wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into him. Thanks. No problem. A moment passed before Eli spoke again. I'm glad you're here. Rachel looked at him with a soft smile. Me too. The storm still moved wildly outside, covering the land with white. But inside the cabin, something felt steady, safe, warm. And even though Eli didn't know what the next few hours would bring, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. The storm did not ease. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger as the day slowly stretched ahead of them. The sky outside the cabin turned a soft, heavy gray, the kind that made it difficult to tell the time without looking at a clock. Snow fell in slow waves at first, then faster, more determined, as if the clouds had decided the world needed a fresh white blanket all at once. Inside the cabin, the lights flickered again, but only for a moment. Eli sighed softly each time they dimmed, while Rachel tried to keep things calm by distracting him with small tasks or gentle conversation. The cabin felt warmer now, not just because the generator held steady, but because having company made everything feel less overwhelming. They were standing by the front window, adjusting a row of lanterns, when Rachel noticed something. Eli kept rubbing the back of his neck, pacing a little whenever he thought she wasn't looking. He wasn't usually like this. He was normally steady, grounded, the kind of person who could handle surprises without losing his calm. But today was different. Today was heavy for him. You okay? She finally asked as she tied a ribbon around a lantern handle. Eli stopped pacing. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine, just stressed. Rachel gave him a quiet, knowing look. Tell me something I don't know. He let out a small laugh. That obvious? Very. Eli walked to the table and leaned on it, staring at the wooden surface as if it had answers. I'm trying to keep things together. Mia wanted this day to be special. She chose this cabin, this view, all these decorations. She put her whole heart into the planning, and now the storm's ruining half of it. Rachel set the lantern down and walked over to him. A little? He raised an eyebrow. This isn't a small change. It's still your wedding day, she replied. A wedding isn't made perfect by weather. It's the people, the feelings, the memories. The snow won't change that. He gave a half smile. You always find the bright side. Someone has to, she said, sitting on the edge of the table across from him. If both of us panic, this place will fall apart. He shook his head lightly. I'm not panicking. You're close, she teased. Eli sighed again, but this time it sounded softer. I just want to do right by Mia. You will, Rachel said calmly. You care. That alone says enough. They sat there for a moment, letting the calm settle between them. The wind whistled outside now and then, but it didn't feel as intimidating as it had earlier. It was just another sound in the background of a long day. Rachel looked around the cabin, her eyes following the decorations and soft lighting. You know, she said quietly, this place actually looks beautiful. Even with the storm. It does, Eli admitted. Mia would love it. She will, Rachel corrected gently. When she gets here. They heard a soft pop from the fireplace, and both turned to look at the glowing embers inside. The fire was steady and warm, giving the cabin a peaceful glow. Rachel stood and added another log, brushing soot from her hands afterward. Eli watched her work and felt something familiar settle in his chest, a feeling he hadn't recognized in years. Rachel always had that effect on him. She grounded him. When they were younger, their ranches stood only a couple miles apart. They used to ride horses together, help each other with chores, and spend long summer evenings talking about what they wanted in life. Eli remembered laughing with her under open skies, thinking everything was simple and clear. Life had grown more complicated since then, but standing here with Rachel again reminded him of calmer days. You ever think about the old times? He asked suddenly. Rachel smiled softly without turning around. Sometimes. Especially on long drives. Inter 7. What do you think about? She paused for a moment, then said, mostly the quiet moments. The little things. Like when we used to race horses to the creek. Or when your mom taught us how to make those cinnamon rolls that never turned out right. Eli laughed at that memory. We burned every single batch. Every time, she said, grinning as she sat beside him again. But we ate them anyway. Eli nodded. We had good times. We did, she agreed. A comfortable silence followed, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. But Rachel could still sense Eli's unease beneath the surface. His shoulders were too tense, his breaths too shallow. Something deeper was bothering him. Something he wasn't saying. Rachel crossed her arms gently. There's more to it, isn't there? Eli hesitated, then looked toward the window as snow drifted against the glass. Maybe. I don't know. Eli, she said in a calm, steady voice. I've known you since we were kids. I can tell when something's wrong. He exhaled, long and slow. It's not that something's wrong exactly. I'm just overwhelmed. Everything happened so fast these past months. The engagement, the planning, the expectations from both families. I barely had time to breathe. Rachel listened quietly, encouraging him with her presence rather than words. I love Mia, he continued. She's wonderful. She's thoughtful, organized, kind. But this whole wedding, Sometimes it feels like I'm rushing toward a future I didn't get a chance to fully understand. Rachel nodded. It's okay to feel that. Big steps can be scary. Doesn't mean you're making a mistake. It just means you're human. Eli relaxed at her words. You really think so? I know so, she answered. Everyone feels unsure before major life changes. It doesn't mean you're doubting her. It means you're adjusting. He looked down at his hands. I guess I just needed to hear that. Then I'm glad I said it, she replied with a gentle smile. They got up again to check the lanterns, the fire, and the decorations. They worked quietly, but the silence felt different now, lighter, easier. Eli seemed calmer, more grounded. Rachel had a way of bringing out clarity in him, of reminding him of who he was, without forcing anything. As the afternoon passed, they found themselves talking about little things, old memories, funny moments, plans for the future. Rachel mentioned wanting to travel more, maybe move closer to the mountains someday. Eli talked about the ranch he hoped to build with Mia, a place where both of their families could visit. You've always wanted that, Rachel said softly. A place to call your own. Yeah, he replied. It feels right. And Mia wants that too? She does, he said. She likes the idea of open land. Quiet evenings. A life that feels real. Rachel nodded, happy to hear it. She always wanted Eli to find someone who understood his heart. As they finished placing the last ribbon along a window frame, Eli stepped back and looked around. It actually looks perfect. It does, Rachel agreed. Storm or no storm. They stood beside each other, admiring their work. Snow continued falling outside, forming soft piles along the porch and covering the landscape in gentle white. The cabin glowed from within, warm and calm, a little shelter from the world. Rachel glanced at Eli, seeing that his shoulders seemed less heavy, his eyes more steady. Feeling better? Yeah, he said with a grateful smile. A lot better. Good. That's important today. Thanks for being here, he said quietly. I wouldn't have missed it, she replied. They stayed near the window for a long moment, listening to the storm together. Despite the cold world outside, the cabin felt warm, peaceful, and safe. And as the hours moved on, Eli felt something he hadn't felt all morning: hope. The hours passed slowly, as if the storm outside was stretching time on purpose. Each time Eli checked the window, the snow looked deeper, smoother, untouched by anything except the wind. The trees swayed gently under the weight of the growing white blanket, and the cabin seemed to grow quieter with every passing minute. It was the kind of quiet that made you notice your own heartbeat. Rachel stood near the fireplace, brushing dust off her sleeves after stacking more wood. The fire glowed steady and bright, giving the room a warm golden color. Eli watched her for a moment, grateful she was still there. He didn't say it out loud, but he didn't want to be alone with his thoughts. Not today. When the generator lights flickered again, even though it was only for a few seconds, Eli's breath caught. He walked toward the small hallway that led to the backup cabin space, a smaller room attached to the main lodge. That room held a second heater and a small emergency kit. It was normally used for storage or for guests needing quiet, but today it became their safe place whenever the lights dimmed. Rachel followed behind him without question. She knew him well enough to see he needed a moment away from the main room. When they stepped into the back cabin, the warmth embraced them instantly. The wooden walls were darker here, and only 2 lanterns lit the space. On the far wall sat a small table with old photos of the ranch owners who had built the cabin decades ago. A soft carpet covered most of the floor, and 2 chairs sat beside the heater. Rachel closed the door quietly behind them, shutting out the faint sounds of the storm. It's not going to go out, she said gently, noticing his worried expression. The generator is just tired. We fixed the main issue earlier. I know, Eli replied, rubbing his hands together. But it still makes me nervous. Rachel nodded and sat in one of the chairs, motioning for him to take the other. Sit for a minute. You've been walking around since the morning. Eli hesitated but eventually sat down, leaning back and letting out a long breath. The warmth of the heater made his shoulders relax. He stared at the wall for a moment before closing his eyes. Rachel watched him silently, giving him space. She could see the worry in his posture, the distant look in his eyes. This was more than simple wedding stress. Something deeper was pulling at him. After a minute, she spoke softly. "What's really on your mind?" Eli opened his eyes slowly and looked at the lantern. "Anywhere," she said. "Just talk. I'm listening." He ran a hand through his hair and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't realize how much pressure I was under until today. I feel like everyone's been expecting me to be perfect. A perfect groom. A perfect future husband. A perfect son. I haven't had a moment to breathe. Video si no ne. On I." Rachel nodded gently, encouraging him. "And I love Mia. I do," he continued. "She's so thoughtful and caring. She works hard at everything she does. But there's been this feeling inside me. Like I'm walking into something big, something I'm supposed to understand completely, but I don't." Rachel leaned slightly forward. "It's normal to feel unsure before a life change. You're not alone in this. It's more than being unsure," Eli said. "I think I've been afraid to say it out loud. Afraid people would think I wasn't ready or that I didn't love her enough." "What do you feel exactly?" Rachel asked, her tone calm and patient. Eli took a slow breath. "I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself. I've been trying so hard to make sure everything fits the plans, the schedules, the expectations, that I forgot to check on my own heart." Rachel's expression softened. "That happens to a lot of people, Eli. You're not failing. You're just human." He looked up at her, eyes tired but grateful. "You always know what to say." "I don't know everything," she replied with a gentle smile. "I just know you." Those words settled between them quietly, like warm air. It was simply the truth, two old friends who had grown up together, who understood each other in ways that didn't need explanation. Eli leaned back in his chair again, staring at the wooden ceiling. "I think I needed a moment like this. A place to breathe. A place to feel like myself again. That's what this room is for," Rachel said lightly. "A small break from the world." He chuckled softly. "Maybe everyone getting stuck in the snow wasn't such a bad thing. See? You're finding the bright side." They both smiled, and the tension in the room softened slightly. After a minute, Rachel stood up and walked to the old shelf on the wall. She picked up a small framed photo of the cabin owners, a couple standing proudly outside the same building they were sitting in now. "They look calm," she said softly. "Even with all the hard work this place must have taken." "Maybe they learned something we haven't yet," Eli replied. Rachel placed the photo back and sat down again. "Maybe they learned that life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful." Eli looked at her thoughtfully, the words sinking deep. The heater hummed softly, filling the room with gentle warmth. It made the shadows stretch across the walls in soft shapes. Outside, the storm continued to whisper. But in here, everything felt still. Rachel rested her hands in her lap. "You know, doubt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you care enough to think deeply." "I guess I was scared to admit it," Eli said quietly. "You've been carrying all of this alone," she replied. "That's what makes it heavy." Eli nodded. "I didn't want to put any extra stress on Mia. She already had so much to do for the wedding." "That's kind of you," Rachel said. He looked at her with a tired, honest expression. "Thank you for listening. Always," she said softly. The warmth in the room grew deeper, gentler. Eli felt his breathing become steadier again. The weight in his chest loosened a little. After another silent moment, Rachel spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you know what you want today to feel like? Not what's expected of you, what you want. Eli thought for a long moment. I want to walk into the ceremony feeling like myself. Not a version of me that's been shaped by pressure. I want to feel real, honest, ready. Then you will, Rachel said confidently. Because you're facing your feelings instead of running from them. Eli smiled faintly. You're good at this. I'm just your friend, she said. Friends remind you of things you forget about yourself. He nodded again, appreciating her presence more than he could say. The storm outside wasn't frightening anymore. It was just part of the day. Nothing more. I think, Eli said slowly, that talking helped more than I expected. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Good. You're not carrying this alone anymore. A soft knock from the wind pressed against the window, but neither of them looked toward it. The room felt too calm, too warm to break the moment. Eli finally stood, stretching his arms. I should check the main room again. Rachel stood too, brushing invisible dust from her sleeves. I'm right behind you. Before they stepped out, Eli paused and looked at her. Rachel? Yeah. Thank you. For helping me find my footing again. She gave him a gentle, warm smile. That's what old friends do. They left the back cabin together, stepping into the soft glow of the main room. The storm was still outside, but inside, something had changed. Eli felt steadier, calmer, and ready for whatever came next. The storm continued to hold the world in its quiet grip. By the time Eli and Rachel stepped back into the main cabin, the windows were nearly fogged from the warm air inside meeting the cold outside. The sky looked softer now, but the snow still drifted heavily, creating a thick blanket over everything in sight. The world felt distant, almost paused, as if waiting for something to change. Inside, though, the cabin glowed with gentle light. The lanterns were steady. The fire crackled softly, and the decorations they had fixed earlier seemed almost magical under the warm golden glow. Eli took a slow breath, feeling more centered than before. Rachel's presence had made a bigger difference than he wanted to admit out loud. He walked around the space, checking each detail again. Not because anything was wrong, but because moving helped him think. Rachel followed behind, her steps soft on the wooden floor. She watched him quietly, noticing the calmer way he held himself. After a few moments, Eli stopped near the large window at the front of the cabin. Snowflakes tapped softly against the glass, their shapes melting as soon as they touched it. He rested one hand on the window frame, looking out into the white world. Rachel walked up beside him, leaving enough space to be respectful but close enough to feel present. Still thinking? She asked softly. Always, Eli said, with a weak smile. Rachel smiled too, but her eyes held a thoughtful look. You seem better, though. Lighter. I am, he admitted. Talking helped. Being in that quiet room helped. And being honest with yourself helped most, she added gently. He nodded, appreciating the truth of her words. They stood there quietly for a while, just watching the snow. The silence wasn't empty. It was the calm, kind, comfortable, and easy. The kind that only existed between people who understood each other deeply. After a moment, Rachel turned her head a little. Eli, can I say something? Of course. You're someone who carries a lot, she began carefully. You always have. Even when we were kids, you took on responsibilities bigger than your age. You wanted to protect everyone, keep everyone happy, make everything feel safe. Eli listened quietly, his gaze still on the window. And that's a good thing, she continued. But sometimes, when you try too hard to make everyone else comfortable, you forget that you deserve comfort too. Eli swallowed gently, her words striking deeper than she intended. You're not failing today, she said softly. You're growing. You're understanding yourself. That's a strong thing, not a weak one. Eli turned his head toward her, his expression warm but tired. Rachel, thank you. Really. She offered him a small smile that carried more meaning than words. Anytime. Another quiet moment passed. The storm whispered outside like a soft lullaby. The lanterns flickered gently, casting warm shadows on the walls, and the air between them felt calm, steady, familiar. Then, something shifted, not in a dramatic way, but in the natural flow of the moment. Eli stepped a little closer to the window, his shoulders slumping slightly with relief. Rachel noticed the small movement and instinctively stepped closer too, placing a gentle hand on his arm. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply supportive, something she had done 100 times back when they were younger, when life moved slower and problems felt simpler. You don't have to carry everything on your own, she said quietly. Not today. Eli closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting her words settle. I know. Her hand stayed on his arm, a reassuring gesture, but the closeness created a new kind of quiet between them. Not uncomfortable. Not confusing. Just different. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Rachel with a gratitude so deep it softened his features. I forgot how calming you are, he said with honesty. Not intention. Rachel felt a small warmth rise in her cheeks, but she remained steady. I'm just here to help. You've always helped, he said, voice softer. More than you know. For a moment, neither of them moved. The shadows danced softly around them, and the warmth of the room wrapped around the moment like a blanket. But then something subtle changed. Eli shifted his weight, turning slightly toward her. His eyes softened in a way Rachel hadn't seen in years, not romantic, but tender. Vulnerable. The kind of look people give only when they feel truly understood. Rachel felt it. She knew that look from their past. She knew it wasn't intentional, just the natural reaction of a man who felt safe, for the first time, all day. And she knew she needed to guide the moment before he misunderstood his own emotions. Quietly, gently, she removed her hand from his arm and stepped just half a step back, creating a soft, respectful space between them. Eli, she whispered, her voice steady and kind. Don't read this wrong. He blinked, startled out of the moment as if waking from a soft daydream. What do you mean? You're overwhelmed, Rachel said with calm clarity. You're tired. You're stressed. And when people feel that way, they sometimes reach for the closest comfort. Eli straightened slowly, understanding beginning to sink in. I know, Rachel interrupted softly, not harshly. I know you didn't mean anything by it. But I just want you to be careful with your heart today. You're getting married, Eli. Your feelings are stretched, not confused. Eli's expression softened with something like relief and respect. He nodded slowly. You're right. F. Rachel smiled gently. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just seeking support. And I'm here. But not in a way that complicates what today is about. Eli looked at her with gratitude. A deep one. I care about you, she said sincerely. That means helping you stay steady when everything feels heavy. He let out a long breath, one that carried the last traces of confusion out of him. I needed that. I needed that. I know, she replied softly. The tension softened and shifted back into something familiar, warm, supportive, grounded. The moment had been fragile, but Rachel handled it with the same calm strength she always had. Eli stepped back to the window, the clarity in his eyes returning. I guess I'm more on edge than I realized. That's okay, Rachel said. Today is big. Big days stir big feelings. Nothing strange about that. Eli smiled gently. You've always been the practical one. Someone has to be, she teased lightly. They shared a small laugh, the energy returning to something easy and natural. After a moment, Eli looked out the window again. I wonder where Mia is now. I hope she's warm. She's probably waiting for safer conditions, Rachel said. But she'll get here. And when she does, everything will fall into place. Eli nodded, looking peaceful again. And you will be, Rachel said with certainty. You're finding yourself again today. That's important. Eli glanced at her, gratitude filling his expression. Thank you. For everything. You're welcome, she replied softly. I'm glad I could help. As they moved back into the main cabin space, something felt different, not in a complicated way, but in a stronger, clearer way. Eli felt steady again. Grounded. Ready. And Rachel felt proud not of herself, but of him. Proud that he had faced his fears. Proud that he was choosing clarity. Proud that he was walking toward his future, with honesty in his heart. The storm outside continued, but inside, peace had returned. The storm finally began to soften near late afternoon, though neither Eli nor Rachel had noticed at first. They had been so focused on keeping the cabin warm, checking the decorations, and occasionally sharing quiet conversations that time slipped past them almost unnoticed. But eventually, a soft change in the light near the windows caught Rachel's attention. The sky was turning from gray to a pale, gentle gold, as if the sun was finally brave enough to peek through the clouds. Rachel walked toward the window slowly, wiping a bit of fog from the glass with her sleeve. Outside, the snow was still heavy, but the falling flakes had slowed. The trees stood calm, the wind no longer shaking their branches. Everything seemed calmer, softer, almost peaceful. Eli, she said quietly, I think the storm is letting up. Not. He walked over quickly, his steps almost hopeful. When he saw the change for himself, a breath of relief left his chest. Long and warm. Maybe the roads will clear soon, he said. They will, Rachel replied gently. I think people will start arriving. He nodded, feeling both nervous and relieved. Mia too. She'll be here. Rachel watched the expression on his face, the way the calm in his eyes returned, stronger this time. She knew he had faced something heavy today, something that could have overwhelmed him if he hadn't been honest with himself. She also knew he was ready now. Finally steady enough to greet the moment he had been waiting for. The two of them moved around the cabin once more, checking small details and putting the last touches on things. Eli straightened the chairs again. Rachel adjusted the lanterns one more time. They brushed light snow off the porch steps together. Each movement felt lighter than earlier, as if the weight of the day had eased off both of them. As they worked, the soft sound of tires crunching through the snow reached them. Eli froze for a moment, eyes wide with surprise. Rachel turned too, her heart lifting with a warm ache. They both stepped toward the window at the same time. A truck slowly drove down the snowy path toward the cabin. Behind it, another car. Then, another. People were finally arriving. Eli stepped outside without a jacket at first, then quickly turned back to grab it from the coat rack before rushing out again. Rachel followed him onto the porch, watching the vehicles approach. Guests stepped out, bundled in scarves and jackets, brushing snow off their shoulders. Some waved, others laughed in relief. But Eli wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking at the last car turning into the drive. A small blue car, familiar in every way. When the door opened, Mia stepped out carefully, holding her coat close to stay warm against the cold breeze. Snowflakes landed on her hair and melted instantly. She looked tired from the long, slow drive, but she was smiling. Eli didn't even wait for her to walk up the path. He hurried down the steps, boots sinking into the snow, making long strides until he reached her. She greeted him with a warm hug, sinking into his arms with clear relief. Rachel watched from the porch, a soft smile spreading across her face. It wasn't a sad smile, or a longing one. It was the smile of someone who understood the big picture. Someone who was grateful to witness a moment that mattered deeply to someone she cared about. Guests continued to gather at the porch, stamping snow off their boots and chatting quietly. The cabin hummed with new energy, now warm, excited, relieved energy. Everything suddenly felt real. Inside, once everyone was settled, Mia walked slowly around the main room, taking in every detail with wide, glowing eyes. "Oh," she whispered. "It looks beautiful." Rachel smiled from near the fireplace, watching as Mia touched the ribbons, looked at the lanterns, and admired the way the cabin looked warm and peaceful despite the storm. Eli walked beside his bride, explaining a few things: who helped with what, how the generator almost gave them trouble, how Rachel arrived early and helped with everything. Mia turned to Rachel with a grateful expression. "Thank you," she said warmly. "You really saved the day." Rachel shook her head lightly. "Just helped. A little." "A little?" Eli laughed softly. "You helped a lot." Mia smiled at both of them. "Well, thank you." The cabin slowly filled with guests, family, close friends, people from both their hometowns. The fire continued to glow warmly, the lanterns flickered softly, and the room filled with gentle chatter and warm laughter. Eli stood near the fireplace for a moment, taking everything in as if trying to capture the entire scene in his memory. The decorations looked perfect. The storm had calmed, the guests were safe, and Mia was finally here. Everything he had been worrying about earlier now felt distant, almost unnecessary. Rachel walked over to him, handing him a cup of warm cider. "You look more peaceful," she said quietly. "I feel more peaceful," he replied with a soft smile. "You helped with that." "I'm glad," she said. "You know," he continued, "I don't think I've ever faced my feelings like that before. Not like today." Rachel nodded. "That's because today mattered to you." "It did," he said. "And I'm ready now. Really, ready." "I know you are," she replied. "You weren't running from anything. You were just trying to get your heart in the right place." He nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Rachel." She smiled, tipping her head slightly. "Go enjoy your day. This is your moment now." As the ceremony preparations began, people took their seats, the music started softly, and the warm glow of candles filled the room with a calm beauty. Rachel moved to the back, blending into the crowd, not wanting to be in the way. She watched quietly as Eli walked to the front, standing tall and steady. Then, Mia stepped forward, her dress light and simple, her smile bright enough to warm the whole room. She walked slowly, her eyes locked on Eli's. And Eli, standing there, surrounded by friends and family, looked completely sure, steady, calm, present. Rachel felt a warm weight in her chest as she watched them. Not sadness, not longing, just genuine happiness. She had helped him get here. She had helped him breathe when everything felt overwhelming. And now, seeing him stand proud and ready, she felt proud too. When the ceremony ended with laughter and happy tears, people gathered around the couple, offering congratulations and warm wishes. The cabin filled with joy. Soft, honest joy. Eli eventually found Rachel near the doorway, where she had quietly stepped aside. "Hey," he said, smiling wide. "Didn't want to be in the way," she teased. "In the way?" he laughed. "Rachel, you've been part of today, more than most people here." She shrugged lightly. "Just giving space where it's needed." He stepped forward and wrapped her in a warm, grateful hug. It was the kind of hug only old friends shared, the kind that carried years of memories, trust, and understanding. "Thank you," he said softly, "for being here, for helping me find my balance, for reminding me who I am." She smiled warmly, patting his back. "That's what old friends do, Cowboy." He laughed gently at the old nickname, stepping back to look at her with soft gratitude in his eyes. Rachel gave him a small nod, one that meant she was proud of him, happy for him, and ready to step into the background where she belonged on this special day. The storm outside might have been strong, but inside the cabin, everything was warm and steady. The kind of warmth that didn't fade easily. As the celebration continued, Rachel slipped outside for a moment to breathe the cold evening air. The snow had settled, quiet and still, glowing softly under the returning light of the sky. She looked out across the white landscape with a peaceful smile. Some storms bring trouble. Some storms bring lessons. But some storms like this one bring clarity. And Rachel knew this day would stay in memory for a long time. Warm, quiet, and honest. Exactly the way it needed to be.